Awesome. All right, greetings. Thank you to everyone for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read session. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout we'll provide in the chat and by visiting our website, a link of which we will throw up in that chat. And it's strongwomenstrangeworlds.weebly.com. I'm your host today, Kate Pope, and you can also find out more about me in the provided handout as well. Today, we're going to be featuring 6 authors: Kristi Petersen Schoonover, C.B. Lyall, C.M. Harris, Tenea D. Johnson, Gillian Polack, and s.b.divya. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Are you guys ready? Because here we go. Our first reader today is Kristi Petersen Schoonover. Kristi Petersen Schoonover's fiction has appeared in many magazines and anthologies. She holds an MFA in creative writing from Goddard College, serves as a co-host of the Dark Discussions podcast, and is a founding editor of the dark literary journal 34 Orchard. Follow her adventures at KristiPetersenSchoonover.com. Kristi, take it away.
Thank you, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to read the first little bit of the short story called Attempted Delivery, which is from my collection, The Shadows Behind, which is about the monsters that live within us. If you like what you hear, I am going to be giving away 1 free copy and to the winner, or you can find it on Amazon. Attempted Delivery. A whisper comes from the package intended from my neighbor. I'm Margolin Jameson, and I live at 53 Morgan Avenue, Mystic, Connecticut. The neighbor, Marilyn Jensen, is at 53 Morgan Avenue Extension. Occasionally, that's where my Amazon pantry boxes get delivered. My phone often notifies me that my item has been left on the porch. I don't have a porch, so I cut through the woods, descend the embankment, and navigate the rickety wooden steps that parallel her steep driveway to get the parcel. Marilyn and I haven't met. She's never home, no matter what time of day or night it is. My girlfriend Suzanne, who met her once, claims Marilyn works for a museum and that she's probably always traveling to exotic places. Suzanne, though, has a talent for romanticizing. I didn't take her seriously until the first time I stood on Marilyn's porch amidst tiki statues, wind chimes made of bones, and shrunken heads. It's creepy, and I'm an anxious person. It's only my need for eyeliner and tampons that keeps me going back. But this is the first time one of her deliveries has ended up at my place, and it's only right to go drop it off. I'm about to pick up the box when I hear the whisper. Broken lobster. What the hell was that? I look to see if anyone's around. There isn't. Broken lobster. What does that mean, anyway? I'm supposed to take Suzanne to Red Lobster for her birthday, and that's been on my mind because it's her favorite place, and I'm not really a fan of seafood. That's probably it. Broken lobster. There it is again. I'm afraid to touch the box. It didn't come from Amazon. In fact, the return and shipping addresses are the same. Marilyn Jensen, 53 Morgan Avenue Extension. Someone was desperate to make sure this got to the right place. Then I think, she won't be home, and what if the thing inside is alive? It shouldn't be left outside in the cold. It's the first week in April, but the nights are still dipping down below freezing on occasion, and the pouring rains we've had for the past 2 days don't make anything more hospitable. What if what's in there dies of exposure? What if it's broken lobster? It whispers. I lift the box. It's light. When I shake it, something rattles, but it feels like it's in one piece. Maybe it's another one of those weird bone things that are hanging all around Marilyn's porch. I put my ear to the box. This time, even louder. Broken lobster! Startled, I drop it on the ceramic tile of my foyer floor. Crap, 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 crap. What if it's broken? Open it, I tell myself. Just check it out. Make sure it's intact, whatever it is. The problem is it's wrapped completely in what looks like butcher shop paper. If I tear into it, there's no way I'll be able to hide the evidence that it's been opened. Broken lobster! It screams. That's it. I have to do it. I get a knife. One of the joys of living alone, no one yells at you for using one of the good steak knives to open your mail, and plan my strategy. Every seam and flap is plastered in tape. It's a struggle not only to get the knife in, but also to keep from stabbing myself. At last, I'm through. The knife, now covered in sticky residue, is probably ruined. I toss it in the sink where it lands on a precariously stacked pile of the Pier 1 dishes my last girlfriend left here. I sincerely hope I broke at least one of them. I work the box free of the paper and pull off the lid, inhaling a waft of something that smells like rotting leaves and bourbon. Once it passes, I take a peek. Inside is an intact, petrified fish. What kind, I have no idea, but the protruding mouth armed with murderous teeth gives me chills. Its taut, grayish tobacco skin, only slightly hardier than tissue and tackier than crepe paper, is worn in patches, revealing its bones. Equally disturbing are dark brushstrokes marbling its rib cage, meticulously painted characters in a maroon ink that bleeds into hairline cracks in the bones, spreading like tree roots. But it's the perfectly round, tenantless eye sockets that nail stalactites through my core. They look angry. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
This is the problem that I have every time I come to do one of these. The reader gets to their 8 minutes and they stop and I go, no, I need to know what's going on with the zombie mummy fish thing. But that's neither here nor there. Our second reader is s.b. Lyall. s.b. Lyall is British, but has lived in New York, India, Belgium, and Hong Kong. She has 2 published novels, The Virus of Beauty, Book 1, and The Veil of Corruption, Book 2 in her young adult fantasy series. She's also a contributor in 25 servings of Soup, that's SOOP, volumes 1 and 2. She is currently working on the last book in her fantasy series. CB, over to you.
Good evening. I'm reading from The Virus of Beauty, Book 1. This is an excerpt from Chapter 3. It's set in the Galveri souvenir store in Hong Kong. A loud croak sounded from the bell above the shop door, instead of its usual soft, magical jingle. Wilf hadn't expected anyone to venture down the narrow street to the store. He tugged a clean T-shirt over his head, smoothed his close-cropped hair into place, and eased the stool out from behind the counter. He winced as the legs grated over the wooden floorboards, but kicked back against the wall, lifting the front legs. A woman stomped down the center aisle towards him. She wore purple silk slippers that sounded more like soccer cleats marching across metal basement hatch. She stopped at the counter and cleared her throat. He took a look in her leaden complexion and doughy features. They were enough to make him recoil, but the enormous wart at the end of a long beaked nose held him transfixed. He gasped. She pursed her lips and her eyes flashed. Wilf's brow furrowed. She reminded him of someone, but he couldn't quite remember who. Beautiful, isn't it? Not many are blessed with a wart of such magnitude, she said. The hairs on his arms all stood up at the sound of her voice. Have we met? Not that I can recall, she said. You're probably right. I think I would remember seeing you before. He tried to avoid meeting her hypnotic brown eyes. They seemed like mud pools wanting to suck him in. Is that so? His stool rocked and forced him to stand. Ermintrude Wakefield is the name. She glanced around the small store. You may call me Witch Wakefield. Wilf braced himself against the wall and shoved his ringed hand into his pocket. His heart raced. The Wizard Council had dispatched this witch to collect him. Well, it didn't make any difference who they sent. He wasn't leaving Hong Kong. Now, I don't usually deal with wizards. Her face wrinkled in the way Myra's did when she took his soccer kit out of the bag for washing. But this time I have to. So, show me the rest of the place. We'll need your father's journal, and then we'll be on our way. There's sure to be a portal nearby we can use. I can't abide taking passengers on my broom, although I'd rather not have to use the warehouse portals up in Sha Tin. But if needs must, there's been some mistake. Wilf could hear the panic in his voice. I'm not a wizard. That was my dad. He died, evaporated, a few weeks ago. Her shadow towered over him. I don't have time for games with a junior wizard. Ermintrude stared him down before turning to survey the store. There wasn't much to investigate. It was possible, with a few steps in both directions, to touch a wall. The small counter protecting Wilf stood in the middle of the back wall. Where's the workshop? Workshop? There isn't one, he said, waving his left arm. Except for a closet through that door, he pointed at a paint-chipped door behind him, and a washroom through the other. The workshop had disappeared. Even Myra hadn't been able to find the way in. He'd heard her knocking on all the walls in the closet, but to no avail. The entrance vanished the moment his father evaporated. Ermintrude wiggled her fingers towards the main door. It locked. The sign flicked to closed, and the shutters came down with a clatter. Hey, you can't do that. I'm not talking about what normals can see. She took off her jacket and hung it on the wall next to the counter. I want to see the wizard workshop located within these premises. She looked around warily, as if checking that no one else was listening. This is a gift store? Ermintrude rubbed her square chin. Wilf winced at the sound, like a wire brush raking over metal studs. I've always thought wizards were a stubborn lot, she sneered, but most don't act habitually stupid. She reached across the counter, grabbed him by his shirt, and pulled him across the wooden surface. I'm sure your father taught you that a witch's facial appearance corresponds to the amount of power she wields. Your idea of beauty, in my case, fled screaming a long time ago. I'd advise you not to misjudge my ability or temperament. She let him go, and he fell back against the wall, knocking the stool over. Her jacket inched away from him. Ermintrude paced, and the displays crowded into a corner. I wish they'd sent someone else. Why do I always get the hopeless cases? There isn't time for this. I should be... She stopped in front of Wilf. Well, we'd better get started, since they did send me and I'm here. She raised her fingers at him and wiggled them. Where was the workshop before it disappeared? Warm air wrapped around him, soothing him. That closet, Wilf said, pointing. Ermintrude pushed past him and stepped into the closet. Wilf shook his head as the strands of magic released him. He rushed after her. Typical, hiding in plain sight, so like a wizard. She tapped the closet's back wall and then caught Wilf's right hand. You do have your father's ring. she said, placing Wolf's hand on a black wood knot. Just a minute. He tried to pull away, but Ermentrude held him in a firm grip. Groans sounded from deep within the wall, and the knot expanded into a yawning black hole. The air shimmered, and a staircase with carved handrail popped into place. Look at that workmanship. She ran her hand over the wooden carvings. You don't see skill like that anymore. Wolf moved to step over the threshold, but Ermentrude knocked him back. Don't you know anything at all about decent magic? She asked, and tuttered. What do the runes say? He watched the symbols shimmer into existence around the entrance. How should I know? Run your fingers over them and then tell me what comes into your mind. He'd always thought magic folk were half mad. This particular witch was fully certifiable. No, you're not tricking me into performing any kind of magic. Ermentrude's bag lifted off her shoulder, placed itself on the floor and opened. A scream jumped out and blasted Wolf full in the face. Torturing my patients is never a good idea. His ears rang from the deafening noise. Think of it more as a ritual than real magic. She softened the pitch of her voice. It's very important that I get into that workshop. You've heard of the Pulch virus that's attacking witch magic? No, he shook his head. Your father's been trying to develop an antidote to cure those suffering from the virus. He contacted us on the day he evaporated, saying he'd made a breakthrough. Ermentrude took a step closer to Wolf. I'm here to collect Reginald's journal. It's the only record of his findings. Sweat poured out of Wolf as the hot waves of Ermentrude's frustration flowed over him. Do you want a large number of deaths on your conscience? I hope you enjoyed this reading. You can hear me read the first chapter and other short stories by visiting my website, s.b.divya.com. Book 1 and 2 are available to purchase in ebook and paperback, and the final book in the trilogy will be published in 2022. Thank you for listening.
Again, another one that I just want to cancel everybody else. Just you read to me, but we'll do that another day.
Okay.
Our third reader is C.M. Harris. C.M. Harris is the author of 4 novels. Her short story and essays appear in O Magazine, Pseudopod, Queer Voices Anthology, Coppice and Break Dark Fiction Anthology, and Meniscus Literary Journal. Her screenplay, The Cost of Glory, received gold and silver awards from the Queer Palm Fire Festival. Go ahead, CM.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm going to be reading from She Never Left. It is a psychological sci-fi thriller, and it's coming out next week, and I'm super excited. And this is the first chapter. The girl waved goodbye to her friends and pointed the tin speed toward the center of the thicket. Girdled by fog, the forest appeared to levitate before her. Warm air closed in, bringing with it the sweet scent of pine sap. The girl grinned wide with the strangest notion, a complete satisfaction for once, and since there would never be another night like this one, she was right. The thicket opened to her like the gullet of a whale, the hard-packed dirt its depressed tongue. As the bike's narrow tires stuttered in and out of rain ruts and across exposed tree roots, she remotely questioned the logic of this shortcut. She'd been showing off for the other kids. Oh, I'm not afraid of the dark. But now the moon had disappeared, and the only light in the woods gleamed from an amber pinpoint halfway in. Branches clawed at her as she sped past them. The faster she rode, the more the distant limbs vibrated and smudged, as if motioning for her to come further. She plowed through a spider web, and its strands clung to the hairs of her arms and eyelashes. She let out a screech and flicked something meaty from her shoulder. But she was doing it, really doing it. In fact, she could even close her eyes and stay on the trail without veering off. She cackled at her newfound ability. The thicket laughed back. A coyote, she reckoned. When she opened her eyes again, the amber light was gone, out, disappeared, relocated, definitely not where it had been before. The bike's momentum halted in an instant as her front tire struck something hard and simply refused to roll over it. The girl's butt lifted in the saddle. She sailed through branches, the black of the woods, the indigo velvet of the sky, the black of the woods again, all of it a sickening spin until she landed with a thud on her face and chest. Eat dirt. Yeah, she got the meaning of it now. Gritty clay stuck to her teeth, thick as peanut butter. The girl spat it out and kept spitting until saliva ran down her chin. She rolled woozily back on a bed of pine needles, blood dripping from her stinging knees and palms. Shorts torn at the inseam from one hell of a cartwheel. Nearby, her bike lay tangled in tree limbs, the front wheels spinning off kilter, the ground tilted. She pulled herself up on stinging palms, leaned back on a rotten stump to get her bearings, then wiped her chin with the back of her hand. She looked around for the amber light to orient herself. It was still out, still gone. Around her, the crooked forest faintly glowed with that gooey fungus she and the other kids had smeared on their skin so they could see each other in the near dark. Foxfire, one of the boys called it. Its pale green slime still striped her arms. A high-pitched buzz rang in her ear. The whir of the county road faded. The scent of licorice grew stronger than when the kids first discovered the cache of fungus. She shivered in the gathering fog. At least it cleared her mind a bit. The dewy grass by her legs fluttered. Something small and slight wound through the blades. She squinted. A colony of ants on the move? Difficult to tell by the faint glowing light. She craned her neck back and the tops of the conifer trees spun. Stars had come out, but they blurred into stripes. All around, the splotches of fungus pulsed. She shuddered and considered calling out for her friends, running back to them before they rode too far away. She tried to push up from the ground, but her brain sloshed in her skull with the effort and she slumped back. Hopefully the ants wouldn't bite her. Hopefully they would march around this giant blocking their path. She rubbed her eyes and blinked. That's no ant colony. Her lips parted as a small black tendril tapped at the skin of her thigh. She thought of a tiny fairy in an old fable with arms like burnt matchsticks, knocking at a neighbor's toadstool. Her skin tingled with a slight electric current. The buzz in one ear rolled into the other, rumbling and pinging as if she were underwater. The forest clarified, growing brighter. The effect was like switching on her brother's night vision goggles. But instead of a green cast, everything glowed amber. Rabbits huddled where shadows used to be. A deer stood wrapped between trees, its antlers cross-hatching the limbs for camouflage. Down the path she'd just ridden, a fox loped off toward the bean fields. As a leering white possum waddled past, 3 babies on its back, the soft crunch of leaves and pine needles tickled her eardrums. The tendril advanced. It climbed her bare leg, winding around it 3 times, and found the deep scrape on her knee. She drew in a great gasp of air, but as pale webbing bubbled up across the wound, the scream died in her throat. She'd forgotten how. Not an hour before, she had played an epic game of Ghost in the Graveyard and savored the terror of the chase, her squeals ripping through the thicket. But now her jaw hung mute, eyes watering from the refusal to blink. Her torn skin stopped stinging. The once oozing blood rapidly dried from bright to dark, then crackled and crumbled away. Her kneecap faded to a chalky hue. Her eyes grew wider, dry mouth gulping in fascination. She sat up straight. The webbing had repaired her. More tendrils came scouting, more than she could watch all at once. In their wake, foamy, pale webs knit across her limbs. She lifted her hands for a moment, but they dropped back to the dirt as if 10 times their weight. The tendrils fastened them to exposed tree roots for safekeeping. Far off in the woods, something moved through the trees, something glowing higher and brighter than the fungus. It floated toward her with the bobbing weightlessness and transparency of a sea creature. True fear finally hit with an electric shock through her spine, brief and all-confirming. The tendrils wrapped tighter. She fell limp, a rabbit, resigned. She shook her head and it lulled on her shoulders. The webs dried her tears and knit her eyes shut. The tendrils found her ears, her nostrils. She let out a wry little huff, bundled there like a mummy. A voice came from all around and from deep within. There is no point in mourning, child. This is what you wished for after all. The girl burst into laughter and didn't stop laughing until the tendrils entered her throat. Thanks everybody for coming.
Wow. Sorry, I'm supposed to be talking right now. That was so good. So our fourth reader is Tenea D. Johnson. Tenea is a multimedia storyteller and award-winning author of 7 science fiction works, including 2021's release, Frequencies, a fiction album, and Broken Fevers, of which Publishers Weekly wrote, the 14 hard-hitting, memorable short stories and prose vignettes in this powerhouse collection from Johnson are astounding in their originality. Go, Tenea.
Thanks, everyone. I'm really enjoying the readings, and you guys are killing me in the comments, I just have to say. So a little bit from both pieces that came out this year. This is Lopsided World from Broken Fevers. When Sango dropped his into the world, Labanja's forearms trembled, and the clouds over the East Manchurian highlands swooped down so suddenly that some villagers wondered what good deed had elevated them into the heavens. In the West, cities crumbled. The concrete and steel could not hold the weight of the sky. So from British Columbia to Caracas, buildings became part of the sea. The flotsam shored up around Sango's giant body and the pole he still held. On land, bodies were crushed into a dust that clung close to the ground, filling the survivors' lungs with a murk so thick they would have to evolve to survive. So they did. And Congo's prophecy came true. Men and women became lizards and lived life on their bellies in the West. In the East, people searched for the reason behind the crooked sky. They did not know of Labanja. Her people had perished centuries ago. In their homeland, the horizon slanted but bore no other clues. Even the god of Congo, who had given her and Sango the poles and placed him in the West and her in the East, had disappeared. But Labanja had been busy and so did not know. Neither she nor the survivors had anyone to explain the lopsided world, so they made it up. The lizards slept in the shade of the debris and sunned themselves on great outcroppings of stone. They mated and fought, much the same as ever, only now they did so in the 3 feet of space from ground to sky. The men and women who still had room to stand sometimes ferried out to the end of the world, East Africa, and dropped their jaws at what they found there. When they got home, they wondered whether to kill their tiny lizards or worship them. In the peaks of the highlands, Labanja struggled to keep her footing. The sky swayed, pulled by the wind in her exhaustion. Sometimes she cried for her brother. Though the world had grown beneath her, Labanja only remembered Sango, how he looked just before he turned away from her, and she from him, and they each made their way to opposite posts. Everything else had been mountains and the blue above her. She thought of his grave smile when she squared her shoulders and bent her knees against the burden. When not thinking of Sango, Labanja watched splinters sprout down her pole. For a time, the lopsided world continued as such. When Labanja dropped her into the world, the pole slivered beneath the weight. She ground the other end into a mountain. Above, the heavens creaked and groaned, struggling to balance on the thin shaft. Just after Labanja reached her brother, who was now a giant island in the middle of the North Pacific, the pole collapsed. In the east, the survivors learned to live low to the ground, not sure if this was the beginning or end of their world. I'm going to follow that with a selection from Frequencies. I had broken the law, and for all the grantors' guilds, riddles, and cryptograms, the punishment was clear. I was to be banished, stripped of my fledgling power, and returned to a world that I'd abandoned 50 years before. So, on the cusp of my ascension to a full wish granter, I fell upon my knees. I didn't expect them to forgive me, but I needed them to know why I had betrayed our pact, forfeited my own wishes, and not granted Lula what she had wished. She was there, but I couldn't look at her. My shame was too great, and the one next to her stood too close. This was the end. There was nothing to do but begin it. So, I picked up my past, the instrument I hadn't held since I became one, and it accompanied me. It took a long time to find the words to say. All the ways I failed you, even today. This will never be enough, no. But all I have is this. So before I say goodbye, this is my list. One true love to hold my hand, grant me 3 wishes, all that I can. For love, for luck, for mercy, a home for passion and grace. 'Cause I may see through time, I'm always looking for your face. For love. For love. They remained unmoved. Thank you.
That was, guys, seriously, I'm here for everything right now. I'm so excited that I'm here tonight. Our fifth reader is Gillian Polack. Dr. Gillian Polack is an award-winning Australian speculative fiction writer. She was awarded the 2020 A. Bertram Chandler Award for a Lifetime Achievement in Science Fiction. Her most recent novel is The Green Children Help Out. Her novels are science fiction and fantasy, which is odd since she is an ethno-historian. Take it away, Gillian.
Thank you. This is the novel where my inner ethno-historian meets alternate worlds, because I felt like it, basically. I don't know how to, honestly, Tenea is a very hard act to follow. I wanted superheroes who were ordinary people, who were like us, so we could be in that world. I wanted them from our world, sort of, visiting this other world and seeing things, so looking at the whole world from the outside. And this is an adapted version of the opening because I needed to fit into a few minutes. So let me just give you the first chapter. It's a pity that the first incident happened when it was wet. It's bad luck to begin a novel with rain falling over London. This novel is probably doomed for other reasons as well. Superheroes are snares to bring stories of darkness and despair. London in the rain, less so. The embankment was wet. The embankment often is wet, for London is a city that enjoys its rain. The chill fell straight from the sky that day, and the few people walking hurried to get where they were going. The wetness grew colder and damper, then even more cold and yet more damp, and 30 metres of the embankment rumbled softly into nothing, stone by stone. The remaining rubble separated from solid land and dropped down into mud and crumbled rock and the ever-changing border between Thames and land. The infrastructure the granite had hidden was replaced by an old verge. The old verge was littered with scraps of everyday life. Although 5 people died, the comment the media ran with was from the moment when a politician stood on a half block of rock too close to the shoreline and exclaimed for the media, "Bloody hell, we've lost 800 years." He then fell the half-metre off that rock and, clutching his phone for safety, was doused by the new mud at the base of the new slope. The politician staggered to his feet, still clutching his phone in his right hand, but holding a small but muddy white pipe on his left. In his left, he bent down to rinse the pipe, then walked back up the slope and stopped before he reached the bustle of journalists. "I was wrong," he said, being somewhat of an amateur historian. "Make that 400 years. The non-natural environment officers were sent the pipes for analysis, along with a goodly measure of mud and rubble. The pipe came to the permanent secretary after its time in the laboratory. The mud and rubble remained in the laboratory. The second incident took place in Milk Street. It was a Saturday morning, and the regular folk were headed to their regular event down the road. One of the people was a new visitor to London. She said to her recently acquired best friend, "You realise that if we were walking in this very place in our own universe, the synagogue would not exist?" "Why do I bring you places?" her friend asked rhetorically. "You're not even Jewish. Let's go to the pub and have a drink. I need a glass of wine more than I need a group of devout people doing the proper thing in the proper way." "What about the person who wanted to meet us here? Isn't there a meeting?" "We can catch her on the way out, and we should whisper some things. No one knows where we come from, remember?" "I don't want to remember. I refuse to be a hero when I can be a sodding alcoholic. I need that drink." As they turned to Poultry, a big bang echoed around them and rattled the windows. The younger woman turned and darted straight into the mess. Her friend sighed and followed the blazing purple spiked hair. Ari was able to remain sedate because her friend carried that banner to her presence everywhere she went. Her own hair was politely tinged to match the colour of her favourite scarf. There was a silence. Injured people, dead people, broken building, tattered. "Hey, Green, look," said the younger. "Don't pick it up," said Ari Green. "Take pictures and then let's get out. We have to report this." The explosion had torn down the front of the building. Old building had been replaced by new. It looked like the buildings on the other side of the street, except the new torn building had posters, and those posters were government ones, featuring a swastika. The ambulance came and the police came and they helped the wounded and packaged the dead and sealed off the whole of that second tiny corner of central London. The younger woman had already sent the pictures home as well as to their contact in the non-naturals. It had taken her a mere instance and her hair had attracted more attention than her work. That hair was indeed a very bright purple. The permanent secretary wrote a small note in reply to those pictures. It arrived at Ari Green's postal address the next day. Ms. Green, further to the discussion concerning recent events, we believe our people could usefully work together. We will arrange for the tourist visas you and your new associate hold to be modified accordingly. We will also arrange accommodation. I will expect you in the office on Monday morning. Yours, Benedicta Baker, Permanent Secretary for the Non-Natural Environment, on behalf of both her own office and of the Office of the Merlin. P.S. On a personal note, when you next send us material through your associate, we would rather they did not address it to Magic Incorporated. And that's it, I'm afraid.
Guys, but seriously, you guys have to stop stopping right when I'm the most invested. I need to know more about Magic Incorporated and like everything. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to everyone who came today. The authors will be sticking around for a bit to answer questions and to chat. Please do not forget to fill out that feedback form, especially if you want to enter any of the giveaways or be notified about future events. And be sure to grab the handout with all the authors' information from the chat area.